The provenance was wrong. It was a small thing, easily overlooked by anyone who didn't spend their days sifting through centuries of paper, identifying subtle shifts in ink, tracing watermarks or recognizing the faintest scent of decay from a particular era. But I did. I was Elias Thorne, Archivist, and I dealt in verifiable history. My life, like my work, was built on order, authenticity, and the quiet satisfaction of understanding the past. Until Clara. Until I found the photograph. It was tucked away in a drawer of her antique writing desk, a piece we'd acquired together years ago, its history meticulously researched and documented by me. The photo itself was innocuous, a casual shot of Clara at a local gallery opening, smiling, holding a glass of wine. But the date stamp on the back, a faint digital imprint, was off by 2 years from the date she'd always given for that specific event, an opening she'd described many times. 2 years. A blink in the grand sweep of history, perhaps, but in the intimate archive of our shared life, it was a glaring inconsistency, a historical forgery, small but unsettling. My life in Charleston was, by most accounts, a quiet success. Our house, a lovely old property near the Battery, was filled with antique furniture, each piece a testament to careful selection and preservation. My job at the South Carolina Historical Society Archives was my passion, and Clara was my partner in building this life, or so I believed. She was elegant, charming, seemingly as devoted to our shared world of history and quiet refinement as I was. But lately, there had been other small things. Unexplained absences, vague answers about her whereabouts, a new, almost brittle energy that didn't fit the Clara I thought I knew. She'd taken up a new interest, she said, a local history group focused on lesser-known aspects of Charleston's past. It sounded fascinating, something we should share, but she always went alone, claiming it was a small, intense study group. The photograph, though, was the first tangible piece of evidence that something was genuinely amiss in the archive of our marriage. It wasn't just a detail out of place, it suggested a deliberate misrepresentation of a past event. And if that, what else? The thought, once admitted, spread through my mind like ink bleeding on ancient parchment. I couldn't ignore it. My instincts, honed by years of identifying historical inconsistencies, screamed that this was not an isolated anomaly. This was the first thread of a much larger, hidden narrative. I began, quietly, to apply my archivist's methods to my own life. I reviewed the recent records, our shared calendar, her casual mentions of her time, the fluctuating tone in her voice. I looked for patterns, for sources that didn't align, for gaps in the story she presented. It felt strange, almost sacrilegious, to turn this analytical lens on the person I had vowed my life to, but the historian in me demanded truth, the authentication of the record. The elegant facade of our life in Charleston suddenly felt fragile, like a beautifully preserved document that might crumble at the slightest touch, revealing a different, perhaps less noble, history beneath. I started with the digital trail, the modern equivalent of dusty ledgers. Clara was careful, but not invisible. Casual searches yielded little, just the public face she presented. I needed a different kind of access, a different kind of expertise. I thought of Beatrice Jenkins was a younger archivist at the Historical Society, bright, energetic, and far more comfortable navigating the digital world than I was. She had a knack for finding things others missed, a digital bloodhound where I was more of a textual archaeologist. I approached her cautiously, framing my questions initially around hypothetical scenarios, discussing the challenges of verifying modern records compared to historical ones. Bea, however, was sharp. She saw past my academic detachment, noticing the tension in my shoulders, the way my hands, usually so steady, fumbled with a quill pen on my desk. "Elias," she said, her voice gentle but direct, "is this about a project, or something personal?" I hesitated. Trusting someone with this felt like releasing a fragile, explosive document into the public domain. But Bea had a quiet strength I admired. She valued truth, too, in her own way. I decided to show her the photograph. I explained the discrepancy, the unsettling feeling it gave me. I didn't voice my deepest fears yet, not even to myself in explicit terms, but the unease was palpable. Bea examined the photo, then the date stamp. She pulled out her phone, a sleek device that seemed impossibly futuristic next to my inkwells and parchment. "Okay," she murmured, her fingers flying across the screen. "Let's see what I can dig up about this gallery opening. Social media, local news archives online, maybe someone else posted photos from that night. She worked quickly, efficiently, a stark contrast to my slow, deliberate methods. Within minutes she found public posts, tagged photos, event listings. The opening had happened on the date Clara claimed, but the photos Bea found, posted by others, showed Clara with a man I didn't recognize, his arm casually around her waist. And more damningly, one photo had a timestamp from a different event, months later, matching the date on the back of my photograph. The photo in my drawer wasn't from the gallery opening at all. It was a composite lie. Clara, a real event, but mismatched dates and hidden company. A deliberate historical forgery. My stomach tightened. It was like finding a meticulously crafted fake document in a collection you thought was pure. The betrayal wasn't just in the act, it was in the deliberate construction of the lie, the effort taken to deceive. "It's a different event," I said, my voice flat. "She wasn't at that gallery opening on that date. Not with me, at least." Bea looked at me, her expression shifting from focused researcher to concerned friend. "Elias—" "I need to know," I interrupted, the archivist's compulsion overriding the pain. "I need to see the whole record, not just this fragment. I need to authenticate the truth, no matter how difficult the source material." Bea nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. She didn't pry, didn't offer platitudes. She simply said, "Okay, Elias, what do you need?" Over the next few weeks, Bea became my quiet accomplice in this grim archival project. She helped me navigate online records, cross-reference data, and understand the nuances of digital footprints. We worked mostly after hours, in the hushed quiet of the archives, the weight of centuries of history pressing down on our modern investigation. It felt surreal, using techniques designed to preserve the past to uncover the unraveling of my present. The inconsistencies mounted. Credit card statements showed spending at places Clara never mentioned going to. Her phone records, which I accessed with a growing sense of dread, revealed frequent calls and texts to a number I didn't recognize, always during the time she claimed to be at her history group or running errands. The pattern was undeniable, a clear narrative emerging from the fragmented data. The unknown number belonged to a Simon Vance. Simon Vance. The name resonated faintly. I recalled Clara mentioning him once or twice, a charming local figure involved in the arts or some such field, someone she'd met through her history group. Bea did some searching. Simon Vance was indeed a presence in Charleston's social scene, known for his charisma and a certain flashy, if perhaps superficial, engagement with the city's cultural events. His online profile presented a polished, attractive image. Another facade, perhaps? The digital trail led me as far as it could. I had the phone records, the credit card data, the mismatched photo, but I needed more. I needed irrefutable proof, the kind of concrete evidence that even the most skilled forger couldn't dispute. I needed a different kind of archivist, one who specialized in the messy, undeniable records of human behavior. BA suggested a private investigator. She knew of one, Mr. Silas, who had a reputation for being discreet and thorough, someone who dealt in facts, not speculation. Contacting him felt like crossing a threshold, moving from intellectual investigation to the harsh reality of surveillance and exposure. But the historical record I was uncovering left me no choice. The integrity of the past, my past, demanded it. Mr. Silas was a man who seemed as ancient and unyielding as the granite steps of the courthouse. He spoke in clipped sentences, his eyes sharp and missing nothing. I presented him with the fragments of my investigation. The phone number, the name, the times Clara was supposedly at her history group. He listened without judgment, nodding occasionally, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond me, perhaps already picturing the streets of Charleston through the lens of his work. "I understand, Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice gravelly. "You require authentication of a personal record." I appreciated his terminology. It fit. "Exactly, Mr. Silas. I need the truth, documented and verifiable." He took the information, quoted a price that made me wince but felt necessary, and promised regular updates. Then he vanished, a ghost in the historical landscape of the city, tasked with documenting the hidden life of my wife. While Mr. Silas worked, my internal struggle intensified. The man of history, who found solace in the fixed, knowable past, was adrift in a present that was fluid, deceptive, and profoundly painful. I looked at Clara, sitting across from me at dinner, talking about her day, her smile seeming just a little too bright, her eyes perhaps avoiding mine a fraction too long. Every interaction felt like examining a document I knew was a fake, searching for the tells, the subtle inconsistencies that gave away the forgery. The Clara I thought I knew was dissolving before my eyes, replaced by a stranger who had expertly woven a false narrative around me. The pain was immense, a deep ache in the archive of my heart. Betrayal wasn't just an event, it was a process, a slow, agonizing realization that the history you thought you shared was a carefully constructed lie. The trust, built over years, crumbled not in a single moment, but piece by piece, with every new fragment of evidence I uncovered. Mr. Silas's updates were delivered discreetly, usually via encrypted email, brief and factual. Clara and Simon Vance were meeting regularly, not at a history group, but at quiet cafes, out-of-the-way restaurants, sometimes at a discreet apartment building downtown. The reports detailed dates, times, locations. The narrative was becoming clearer, more damning with each entry. Then came the photographs. Mr. Silas didn't deal in melodrama, but his camera captured the undeniable truth. Photos of Clara and Simon together, close, intimate, their body language speaking a language that needed no interpretation. Photos of them entering the downtown apartment building together, late in the evening. The images were sharp, clear, irrefutable. They were the definitive documents, the primary sources that authenticated the forgery of my marriage. Looking at them, the intellectual distance I had tried to maintain collapsed. This wasn't just a historical record of deceit. This was my life. My wife, my pain, captured in stark, undeniable images. The ache in my chest sharpened into a piercing agony. The history I had believed in, the future I had planned were gone, replaced by this ugly, undeniable truth. The decision formed not in a burst of anger, but with a quiet, chilling certainty. There was no salvaging this narrative. The document was irreparably damaged, the forgery too extensive. I couldn't confront her. What would be the point? She had proven herself a master of deceit, capable of constructing and maintaining an elaborate lie. A confrontation would only yield more lies, more attempts to rewrite the history I had so painfully uncovered. I, Elias Thorne, Archivist, would not participate in perpetuating a false record. My path became clear. I wouldn't rage. I wouldn't seek revenge in the conventional sense. My response would be an act of historical preservation, a deliberate archiving of the truth and a complete severance from the forged narrative. I would disappear. I would leave the lie behind and begin the painstaking process of creating a new, authentic history for myself. My planning was methodical, mirroring the careful steps I took when preserving a fragile document. I discreetly contacted my supervisor at the Historical Society. I explained in broad strokes that I needed a significant change, a fresh start. I mentioned family issues requiring me to relocate. My supervisor, a kind, older woman who respected my work, was understanding. She knew of a smaller archive in a quiet coastal town in Maine that was looking for an experienced archivist. The position wasn't prestigious, but it offered stability and distance. It was perfect. A new historical landscape in which to plant my roots. I began the logistical process of dismantling my life in Charleston. I arranged for movers to transport my most essential belongings, my books, my research materials, a few pieces of furniture that held personal meaning, carefully catalogued and packed like precious artifacts. I consulted a lawyer, a different one from the one who handled our wills years ago, and initiated divorce proceedings, instructing him to serve the papers only after I had gone. I transferred my financial assets, ensuring Clara had access to joint accounts for a period, but securing my own future. I removed her name from my personal accounts and made my sister, Eleanor, the beneficiary of my life insurance. Eleanor. I needed to talk to her. Eleanor lived a few hours away in Atlanta. She was my younger sister, pragmatic and grounded, less prone to my historical musings, but possessing a sharp intuition and unwavering loyalty. I drove up on a weekend, telling Clara it was a necessary trip to visit some distant relatives for archival research. Another small lie in the growing collection. Sitting in her comfortable modern living room, so different from the historical weight of my own home, I laid out the narrative I had uncovered. I showed her the photographs, the reports from Mr. Silas, the phone logs. I presented the evidence like an archivist presenting a collection of damning documents, detailing the inconsistencies, the patterns, the undeniable truth. Eleanor listened, her initial skepticism giving way to shock, then anger. Clara? Our Clara? No, Elias, she couldn't. But the evidence was there, irrefutable. She picked up a photo, her hand trembling slightly. Who is this man? Simon Vance, I said. Part of her new history group, apparently. I explained my plan, the job in Maine, the decision to leave without a confrontation, the divorce proceedings. Eleanor was stunned. Just leave? Vanish? Elias, that's extreme. It's the only way to preserve the truth, I said, the words feeling deeply right. To sever the authentic record from the forgery. A confrontation would just create more lies, more attempts to rewrite the past. I can't live in that false narrative anymore. She looked at me for a long moment, seeing not just the quiet archivist, but the man whose foundation had been shattered. Okay, Elias, she said finally, her voice filled with a fierce protectiveness. Okay, what do you need me to do? Her support was a lifeline, an anchor in the turbulent waters. She helped me with some of the logistical details, offering practical advice and a place to land if needed. She promised to be there for me, to help me navigate the messy aftermath from a distance. Her acceptance of my extreme plan, born out of her understanding of my character and the depth of the betrayal, solidified my resolve. I also had a difficult conversation with Bea. I explained that I was leaving Charleston, taking the job in Maine. I didn't give her all the details, but I told her that her help had uncovered a truth that meant I couldn't stay. She was saddened by my departure, but understood the necessity. Elias, wherever you go, promise me you'll keep in touch, she said, her eyes earnest. You're a good man. Don't let this forgery destroy you. I won't, Bea, I promised. I'm just relocating the archive. The final days in the Charleston house were imbued with a profound sense of melancholy, like walking through a historical site knowing it would soon be closed to the public. I packed my most cherished books, the ones that felt like old friends, their pages filled with the verified histories I trusted. I packed my grandfather's compass, a small brass artifact that had guided him through his own journeys. These were the authentic pieces of my past, the ones I would carry forward. I notified Clara that I would be away for a few days on an unexpected research trip. Another lie, the last one I would tell in this house. She seemed preoccupied, perhaps already anticipating the end of her workshop and her return to the life she had been so eager to escape. She kissed me goodbye, a fleeting touch on my cheek, already mentally elsewhere. Her detachment, even now, felt like another confirmation of the distance that had grown between us, a distance she had created. The movers came and went, taking the carefully packed boxes. The house felt hollow, the absence of furniture like missing chapters in a book. I spent the last day alone, walking through the empty rooms, remembering the history that had unfolded here, the quiet evenings, the shared meals, the belief in a future that would now never come to pass. It felt like archiving a life, placing it in storage, preparing to seal the box forever. My final act in the house was the preparation of the final archive for Clara. I gathered the key documents, the PI reports, the damning photographs, the analysis of the phone records, the original photo with the mismatched date. I placed them carefully inside the drawer of the antique writing desk where I had found the first clue, arranging them like a historical exhibit, a curated collection of undeniable truths. I added a brief handwritten note placed on top. The record is complete. The forgery is exposed. This is the authentic history. I changed the locks on the doors, a symbolic act of severing access to the past we had shared. No longer would this house be a place where she could return to the comfortable lie. It was now a sealed archive, containing the truth she had tried to bury. Just before I left, sitting in my car parked a block away from the house, I opened my laptop. I drafted an email to Clara. I attached 3 specific photographs, one of her and Simon together at a cafe, undeniably intimate, one of them entering the downtown apartment building, and a close-up of the photo from the writing desk, highlighting the date discrepancy. The subject line was simple: the authentic history. The body of the email contained only 3 words, stark and final, echoing a historical declaration of severance. I dissolve this. I timed the email to send in an hour, knowing she would be arriving home soon after. I wanted her to receive the first glimpse of the truth while she was still basking in the afterglow of her secret life, just before she discovered the physical evidence waiting for her. Then I put the car in gear and drove away. I didn't look back at the house, at the life I was leaving behind. The streets of Charleston, usually a source of comfort and familiarity, felt alien, like walking through a historical reenactment that had lost its meaning. The air was thick with the scent of salt and jasmine, a fragrance that now seemed tinged with the bitter smell of decay. Driving north, away from the humid embrace of the South Carolina coast, felt like traveling through time, shedding the layers of a false history. The landscape changed gradually, the flat coastal plains giving way to rolling hills, the Spanish moss disappearing from the trees. My mind, usually so ordered, was a whirlwind of pain, regret, and a strange, unsettling sense of liberation. It was the grief of losing a life, mixed with the freedom of escaping a lie. I drove for hours, the miles ticking by on the odometer like entries in a new, unwritten history book. I stopped for the night in a small town in Virginia, finding a quiet old inn that felt grounded in a history I could trust. Over a solitary dinner, I pulled out my grandfather's compass. Its needle pointed north, towards the direction I was heading, towards the unknown, but hopefully towards authenticity. The road trip north became a pilgrimage of sorts, a deliberate process of shedding the past and embracing the future. I avoided highways, choosing instead the smaller, winding roads that took me through forgotten towns and past landscapes that felt timeless. I visited historical sites, not for research, but for solace. I walked the battlefields of Virginia, places where narratives clashed and were rewritten in blood and sacrifice. I visited old lighthouses along the coast, symbols of guidance and steadfastness against the turbulent sea. Each place offered a different perspective on history, on change, on endurance. I contacted Eleanor and Bea properly, letting them know I was safe and on my way to Maine. I sent them the same set of evidence I had sent Clara, along with a more detailed explanation of my decision and my new destination. Eleanor called immediately, her voice thick with emotion. "Elias, are you all right?" Mom called, frantic. She found everything. "I'm all right, Eleanor," I said, the words feeling both true and inadequate. "I'm relocating the archive. She has the complete record now." Eleanor told me about Clara's reaction. Shock, disbelief, then a torrent of calls to mutual friends trying to find me, trying to control the narrative. But I was already beyond her reach, physically and emotionally. My friends, those who knew both of us, were stunned. Some reached out to me, offering support, grappling with the reality of the carefully constructed facade Clara had presented. I kept my exact location private for now, telling them I would be in touch once I was settled. My most important conversations were with my daughters. Clara and I hadn't had children, a shared decision made early in our marriage, though sometimes I wondered if it was a history we had truly agreed upon. But Eleanor had 2 daughters, nieces I adored, who were now young women in college. They were like daughters to me, and I knew I couldn't simply vanish from their lives without explanation. I called my eldest niece, Sarah, first. She was studying art history in Philadelphia. I explained what had happened as gently as I could, framing it as the discovery of a profound dishonesty that made it impossible for me to stay. I told her about the evidence, the deliberate lies. Sarah was quiet at first, processing the news, then her voice filled with a quiet fury. "Aunt Clara, but she always seemed so." "I know," I said. "It was a very convincing forgery." I offered to send her the evidence, not to turn her against her aunt, but so she would understand the truth and my reasons. She accepted. My conversation with my younger niece, Emily, a marine biology student in Boston, was similar. She was more pragmatic, less outwardly emotional than Sarah, but her shock and disappointment were clear. She also asked to see the evidence. Sending those documents, those painful records, to my nieces felt like releasing a difficult truth into a new generation's archive. It was necessary. They deserved to know the authentic history, not the version Clara would undoubtedly try to create. Their loyalty, freely given after seeing the evidence, was a balm to my wounded spirit. They didn't blame me. They understood that I was acting to preserve my own integrity. The journey continued, each state boundary crossed like turning a page in a long book. I drove through New Jersey, a necessary passage, then into Connecticut, where I visited Mystic Seaport, a living history museum, finding a strange comfort in the meticulously preserved past of maritime life. The smell of tar and salt, the creak of wooden ships, the stories of journeys taken and lives rebuilt after loss, it resonated deeply. Entering Maine felt like arriving at a new, unwritten chapter. The air was cooler, cleaner, carrying the scent of pine and the sharp tang of the ocean. The landscape was rugged, beautiful, less manicured than Charleston, more authentic in its wildness. My new home was a small, quiet town on the coast, its history etched into its clapboard houses and rocky harbour. The archive where I would work was modest, housed in a sturdy old building that smelled pleasantly of old paper and beeswax. It was a place for quiet work, for preserving local histories, a far cry from the grand narratives of Charleston, but it felt right. It felt real. Settling in was a process of deliberate creation. I unpacked my books, arranging them on shelves like trusted companions. I set up my small desk, placing my grandfather's compass in a prominent spot, its needle still pointing north, reminding me of the direction I had chosen. The small apartment was simple, uncluttered, a blank page ready for a new story. I began work at the archive. My colleagues were few but welcoming. They were dedicated to their work, quiet people who understood the value of preserving the past. I found a comfortable rhythm in the daily tasks, cataloguing new acquisitions, assisting researchers, carefully conserving fragile documents. It was a different kind of history than I was used to, focused on local families, maritime trade, the stories of people who had built lives in this rugged landscape. It was grounding, authentic, a stark contrast to the fabricated history I had left behind. I received the formal divorce papers from my lawyer. Serving them marked another point of no return, a legal severing of ties. I imagined Clara's reaction, her attempts to control the narrative, to spin a new version of events. But the truth was out, documented and archived. My nieces, Sarah and Emily, were incredibly supportive. They called regularly, checking in, sharing updates about their own lives. They were angry at Clara, disappointed by her actions, but they didn't let it consume them. They were strong young women, resilient and wise. They visited me in Maine during a break from school, exploring the town, walking the rocky beaches, breathing the crisp air. Showing them my new life, my new archive, felt like sharing a hopeful new chapter of my own history. They saw that I was rebuilding, finding peace. B.A. also kept her promise. She visited one weekend, escaping the heat of Charleston. She was impressed by the quiet beauty of the Maine coast and the sense of peace she found in my small archive. We talked for hours, sharing stories, laughing, acknowledging the pain of the past, but focusing on the possibilities of the future. She remained a link to a part of my past, but a genuine one, based on shared values and true friendship. Eleanor called often, pragmatic as ever, ensuring I was managing the practicalities of my new life. She was dealing with some of the fallout in Charleston, navigating the reactions of mutual acquaintances who were struggling to reconcile the Clara they knew with the evidence I had provided. It was messy, as human history often is, but necessary. I started exploring my new home. I walked the coastline, feeling the bite of the wind and the spray of the waves. The ocean, vast and indifferent, was a powerful presence, a reminder of forces larger than human deceit. I found a quiet cafe where the locals gathered, nursing cups of strong coffee and sharing stories. I began to feel less like a visitor and more like a resident, a new entry in the town's ongoing history. I even started thinking about acquiring a boat. A small sailboat, perhaps, something I could handle on my own, to explore the intricate coastline, to feel the wind in my face and the pull of the tide. Sailing had always been a source of freedom for me, a connection to something vast and authentic. It felt like the right pursuit for this new chapter. Life wasn't suddenly perfect. There were still moments when the pain would surface unexpectedly, triggered by a song, a scent, a fleeting memory. The wound of betrayal was deep, and while time was a healer, it didn't erase the scar. I knew my heart wasn't fully healed, not yet, but it was no longer bleeding. It was mending slowly, painstakingly, like a fragile document being carefully repaired. I thought about Clara and Simon sometimes. Mr. Silas had provided a final, brief report before closing his file. Simon's own marriage had ended, his wife unwilling to accept his betrayal. Clara and Simon were still together, navigating the social fallout in Charleston, their lives seemingly less glamorous, perhaps less charming, now that their secret history was exposed. They hadn't published anything, either of them, their literary aspirations perhaps casualties of their real-life drama. Their narrative, the one they had tried to create through deceit, seemed to be unraveling. My own narrative, however, was being rewritten one day at a time in this quiet corner of Maine. It was a story of loss, yes, but also of resilience, authenticity, and the quiet strength found in starting anew. I had left behind a forgery and found my way to a place where history felt real, where people felt genuine, and where I could finally live a life that was true. The archive of my life was open once more, and I was ready to fill its pages with an authentic history. Current part characters: 3,983 total characters, 5,952. Months turned into a year, then 2. The rhythm of life in the coastal Maine town settled over me like a comfortable blanket. I learned the subtle shifts of the tides, the names of the local fishing boats, the best time of day to walk the rocky point. My work at the archive continued to be a source of quiet satisfaction. I became involved in the local historical society, giving talks, helping with preservation efforts. I was no longer just an archivist. I was a part of this community's history, contributing to its record. I bought a small sailboat, a classic wooden sloop named the Authentic. Restoring her became a labor of love, a project that mirrored the meticulous process of mending a damaged document. I sanded, I varnished, I spliced lines, my hands finding a new kind of precision outside the archive. Sailing the Authentic in the harbour, the wind filling her sails, felt like pure freedom, a connection to something elemental and true. My nieces, Sarah and Emily, remained a constant, joyful presence in my life. They visited whenever they could, bringing their friends, filling my small apartment with youthful energy and laughter. They had navigated the complexities of their relationship with Clara, finding their own paths to understanding or perhaps acceptance. They saw my peace, my quiet contentment, and it seemed to offer them a different perspective on dealing with difficult truths. They were proud of me, they said, for building this new life. Their pride meant the world to me. B.A. visited less often now, her career flourishing in Charleston, but we spoke regularly. She was doing important work, bringing modern techniques to bear on historical preservation. She sometimes shared snippets of news from Charleston, the ongoing messy saga of Clara and Simon, still together, still struggling, their lives seemingly defined by the fallout of their affair. It felt distant now, like reading a historical account of events long past. Eleanor remained my steady anchor, my sister, the one who had seen me at my lowest and supported my radical decision. We talked about everything, my new life, her family, the quiet passage of time. She was planning a trip to come sail with me on the Authentic next summer. I met people in town, quiet, genuine people who valued community and the simple pleasures of life. There was a woman, a local artist who painted seascapes, whose quiet strength and appreciation for the beauty of the coast resonated with me. We shared coffee sometimes, talked about history and light, and the enduring power of the ocean. It was tentative, respectful, a new kind of connection built on shared authenticity, not hidden histories. I wasn't ready for a grand romance, perhaps never would be, but the possibility of genuine connection was there, a quiet hope on the horizon. The divorce was finalized, a legal formality that simply confirmed the reality I had created years ago. Clara attempted contact a few times, emails filled with a mixture of blame, self-pity, and attempts to minimize the past. She still seemed unable to grasp the depth of the betrayal, the fact that it wasn't just an affair, but a fundamental violation of truth, of the historical record of our life together. She still tried to rewrite the narrative, claiming it was my fault, that I was cold, distant, that she was just seeking inspiration. I responded sparingly, if at all. My final email to her was brief. "The record is closed," I wrote. "The archive is sealed. There is nothing more to discuss." I no longer lived with the daily weight of suspicion, the pain of deceit. The 600 miles between us were more than just physical distance. They were a buffer, a necessary separation from a toxic past. She was no longer the central figure in my life's narrative. I was. My life in Maine felt authentic. The history here was tangible, etched in the rocks and the tides, in the stories of the people who had lived and worked this coast for generations. There were no hidden histories, no carefully constructed forgeries, or if there were, they were not mine to uncover anymore. My work was to preserve the verifiable past, and my life's work was to build a verifiable future. I had lost a marriage, a home, a perceived history. The cost was immense, but in return I had gained something invaluable: authenticity, freedom, and a profound sense of self-reliance. I had proven that even when your carefully constructed world crumbles, you can gather the pieces, discard the forgeries, and build something new, something real, on a foundation of truth. My heart wasn't fully healed. Perhaps it never would be. Some historical wounds leave indelible marks, but I no longer felt like a damaged document stored away and forgotten. I felt like a new volume, its pages crisp and blank, ready to be filled with the authentic history of a life reclaimed. The future stretched before me like the vast, open ocean, unpredictable, challenging, but full of possibility, and I, Elias Thorne, Archivist, was ready to navigate its currents, charting my own course, creating my own true narrative. Years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to the archive of my life in Maine. The small town became home in the truest sense. I knew the store owners by name, participated in town meetings, and even volunteered at the local historical society events, sharing my expertise with enthusiasm. The community here was grounded, their history intertwined with the rugged landscape and the unforgiving sea. It was a history I could respect and contribute to. My work at the archive, while not the grand scale of Charleston, offered its own deep rewards. I discovered forgotten letters, unearthed surprising connections between local families and national events, and helped people connect with their own pasts. It was a quiet, deeply satisfying work, validating my belief in the enduring power of truth and authenticity. The authentic became my sanctuary. I spent countless hours sailing the coastline, the wind and waves my only companions. The ocean's vastness put my own past pain into perspective. It was a constant reminder of the world outside the small, contained drama of human relationships, a world of immense power and undeniable truth. I learned to read the sky, the water, the subtle shifts in the wind, a different kind of archiving of natural forces. My relationship with Sarah and Emily deepened. They were no longer just nieces. They were like daughters, confidantes, friends. They had graduated college, started their careers, navigating the complexities of young adulthood. They brought their partners to meet me, seeking my quiet approval, sharing their hopes and fears. They had processed their mother's betrayal in their own ways, and while the relationship remained strained, they had built independent lives, refusing to be defined by her choices. They were remarkable young women, resilient and kind, and I was immensely proud of the authentic lives they were creating. B.A. was now a respected figure in the archival world, publishing papers and speaking at conferences. Our conversations shifted from my personal crisis to shared professional interests, the evolution of archival science, the challenges of preserving digital records, the modern forgeries we now faced. She was a testament to the enduring power of dedication and intellectual curiosity, a true colleague and friend. Eleanor and her husband visited regularly, enjoying the slower pace of life in Maine and the chance to spend time with me. We talked about family history, sharing stories of our parents and grandparents, reinforcing the authentic narrative of our shared past. Their presence was a comforting constant, a reminder that some bonds are not easily broken. The artist, whose name was Eleanor, a different one, and I developed a quiet friendship. We talked about the interplay of light and shadow, the stories held within old buildings and weathered faces. She painted the ocean in all its moods, capturing its raw authenticity. We never pursued a romantic relationship beyond a certain point. Perhaps neither of us was truly seeking that kind of complexity anymore. But the connection was genuine, built on mutual respect and a shared appreciation for the beauty and truth found in the world around us. I was no longer lonely. My life was full, rich in quiet ways. I had my work, my boat, my friends, and my family. The community in town welcomed me, accepting me for who I was, not for who I had been married to. I was Elias Thorne, the archivist who lived by the harbour, who sailed his small boat, who knew the history of the town. My identity was no longer tied to a shared, broken narrative. It was my own, built piece by piece, authenticated by my actions and my choices. I rarely thought of Clara and Simon anymore. Their story had faded into the background, a minor footnote in the grander archive of life. I heard through the grapevine occasionally that they were still together, still in Charleston, their lives seemingly smaller, less vibrant than the grand stage they had sought. The inspiration they had pursued through deceit had seemingly failed to materialize into the literary success they craved. It was a quiet form of karma, perhaps, the truth asserting itself in the end. The wound of betrayal was still there, a faint scar beneath the surface, a reminder of the vulnerability inherent in trusting another human being. But it no longer defined me. It was a part of my history, yes, but not the entirety of the archive. I had learned from it, grown stronger, more resilient, more appreciative of the authentic connections I had found. My heart, once shattered, had been painstakingly mended. It wasn't the same as before. The cracks were still visible if you looked closely, but it beat steadily, strong and true. I had faced the difficult truth, dismantled the lie, and built a new life on a foundation of authenticity. Looking out at the harbour from my window, watching the fishing boats head out as the sun rose, I felt a profound sense of peace. The past was archived, the future was open, and the present was mine, to live fully and truthfully. This was my authentic history, still being written, one quiet, beautiful day at a time. Current part characters, 393, total characters, 2,934. The years continued to layer upon each other, like sediment in a historical dig. The quiet pace of life in coastal Maine suited me. I found a deep satisfaction in the cyclical nature of the seasons, the ebb and flow of the tides, the reliable return of the fishing fleet. It was a world of undeniable realities, a refreshing contrast to the deceit I had left behind. My work at the archive expanded. I initiated a project to digitize the town's earliest records, ensuring their preservation for future generations. It was a painstaking process, requiring patience and attention to detail, qualities I possessed in abundance. Working with these fragile documents, handling the paper that had passed through hands long gone, felt like a sacred trust. I was a custodian of truth, ensuring the authentic record endured. Sailing remained my passion. The authentic. And I explored the intricate network of islands and coves along the coast. I became adept at reading the charts, understanding the currents, navigating by the stars. It was a solitary pursuit, but never lonely. The ocean was a constant companion, its vastness a source of both humility and strength. It reminded me that while human dramas can feel all-consuming, they are but small ripples in the grand unfolding history of the world. My nieces, Sarah and Emily, were thriving. Sarah was now a curator at a museum, her passion for art history leading her to a fulfilling career. Emily was working on marine conservation projects, dedicating her life to protecting the oceans she loved. They were independent, successful, and happy. Their lives were a testament to their own resilience and the strong foundation they had built despite the complexities of their family history. They visited frequently, sometimes bringing their partners, their laughter filling my small house. They were my true family now, the authentic connection that endured. Bea continued her groundbreaking work in Charleston, a vibrant force in the archival community. We met at conferences sometimes, sharing insights and stories. She had married, finding happiness with someone who appreciated her intellect and spirit. She was a reminder that new chapters could begin and authentic connections could be found, even after difficult experiences. Eleanor and I remained close, our sibling bond a quiet, steady presence in our lives. We shared holiday meals, discussed family matters, and supported each other through life's inevitable challenges. Her pragmatism balanced my introspection, and her unwavering love was a constant source of comfort. My friendship with the artist Eleanor deepened into a comfortable companionship. We shared meals, visited galleries, and talked for hours about art, history, and the enduring mysteries of life. There was a quiet understanding between us, a shared appreciation for authenticity, and a gentle acceptance of life's imperfections. We found solace in each other's company, two people who had navigated loss and found a quiet harbour. I thought about Clara and Simon even less now. Their story had become truly historical, a closed chapter. I heard they had moved away from Charleston, seeking a fresh start elsewhere, but their literary aspirations had never materialized. The narrative they had tried to force, built on deceit and superficiality, had failed to resonate. It was a stark contrast to the quiet, authentic life I had built, a life whose value was measured not in external validation, but in internal truth. The scar of betrayal remained, a part of my personal history, but it no longer ached with the same intensity. It was a reminder of the past, a lesson learned, a cautionary tale in the archive of my experiences. But it did not define my present or limit my future. I had faced the truth, however painful, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my life. I had built a new life, stone by stone, document by document, on a foundation of authenticity. I had found peace not in forgetting, but in properly archiving the past and focusing on the verifiable truths of the present. My heart, though marked, was whole. I was Elias Thorne, archivist, sailor, friend, uncle, and a man who had successfully rewritten his own narrative, creating a life that was at last truly his own. Looking out at the vast, timeless ocean, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey had been difficult, the cost high, but the destination was worth it. I had found my authentic self, here in this quiet corner of Maine, among the genuine people and the enduring history of the coast. The future was still unwritten, a blank page in the archive, but I was ready to fill it, one authentic entry at a time. More years passed, folding into the past like carefully preserved documents placed in acid-free boxes. My hair had turned fully grey, mirroring the weathered wood of the docks. My steps were perhaps a little slower, but my hands remained steady, capable of both the delicate work of conservation and the sturdy handling of ropes on the authentic. I had become something of an institution in the town, the quiet archivist with the sailboat and the deep respect for local history. I gave talks at the library, helped families trace their ancestry, and advised on the preservation of old buildings. My life was woven into the fabric of the community, a part of its ongoing story. Sarah and Emily were now fully independent, successful women, building their own families. They brought their children to visit me, introducing them to their Uncle Elias and the wonders of the Maine coast. Seeing the next generation explore the harbour, touch the old books in the archive, and feel the spray of the ocean from the deck of Authentic filled me with a quiet joy that surpassed any pain from the past. They represented the continuity of authentic connection, the future unburdened by the lies of the previous generation. B.A. was now the director of the Historical Society in Charleston, a position she earned through hard work and dedication. We spoke less frequently, our lives diverging, but the bond of shared history and mutual respect remained. She was a reminder that some records, some friendships, endure. Eleanor and her husband had moved closer to their own children, but we spoke weekly, sharing the quiet details of our lives. Our sibling bond, forged in childhood and strengthened by shared experiences, was a constant, reliable presence. My friendship with Eleanor, the artist, continued to deepen. We were two quiet souls who had found solace and connection in the later chapters of our lives. We understood each other's need for both solitude and companionship, for the beauty of the world and the truth found in quiet moments. We walked the beaches, watched the sunsets, and talked about the enduring power of art and history to make sense of the human experience. I thought of Clara and Simon now only rarely, usually when a news article about infidelity or literary struggles crossed my path. Their story was complete, archived in the past. I had heard, years ago, that they had eventually drifted apart, their relationship unable to withstand the weight of its origins and the lack of external validation they craved. The inspiration had dried up, the forgery exposed, leaving them with nothing but the wreckage of their choices. It was a sad ending, but one that felt historically inevitable. My own ending was still being written, but it was a story of quiet triumph. I had not sought revenge, but authenticity. I had not erased the past, but properly archived it. I had not forgotten the pain, but used it to build a stronger, truer self. My heart was healed, not smooth and unmarked, but like a cherished antique document, repaired with care, its history visible in the mended tears and the faint lines of its journey. It was a testament to endurance, to resilience, to the power of truth to ultimately prevail. Sitting in my favourite chair by the window, the sound of the harbour a soothing backdrop, I looked out at the Authentic, bobbing gently at her mooring. She was a constant reminder of the journey I had taken, the freedom I had found. My life was full, not with grandeur or excitement, but with the quiet richness of authentic connections, meaningful work, and a deep peace that came from living a life aligned with my truest self. I had vanished from one history, a history built on lies, and appeared in another, a history built on truth. This was my story, Elias Thorne, archivist of life, sailing into the quiet authenticity of his own enduring narrative. The seasons continued their predictable cycle, a comforting rhythm in my life. Spring brought the return of the migratory birds and the slow awakening of the harbour. Summer was vibrant with tourists and the lively bustle of the town, a time for sailing and spending time with my nieces and their growing families. Fall painted the landscape in fiery hues, a beautiful, melancholic transition. Winter brought quiet solitude, the harbour often iced over, a time for reflection, reading, and the quiet work of the archive. I was no longer just Elias Thorne, the archivist. I was Elias Thorne the elder, the keeper of stories, both historical and personal. Younger colleagues at the archive sought my advice, not just on conservation techniques, but on navigating the complexities of life and work. I shared my knowledge, my quiet wisdom, the lessons learned from a life that had seen both profound deceit and profound truth. My relationship with Eleanor, the artist, had deepened into a quiet, unspoken partnership. We understood the rhythms of each other's lives, the need for creative solitude and shared moments of quiet companionship. We found comfort in each other's presence, two souls who had found their authentic paths later in life. We didn't need grand declarations or dramatic gestures. Our connection was built on a shared history of resilience and a mutual appreciation for the quiet beauty of the world. My nieces were now raising their own children, the next generation of Thornes, carrying forward the authentic history of our family. They spoke of their Uncle Elias with love and respect, sharing stories of his quiet life by the sea. I saw in their children's eyes the promise of a future built on honesty and genuine connection, a future I had fought to preserve. I rarely thought of Clara and Simon anymore. Their story was truly archived, a piece of history that no longer held any power over me. I had heard they had eventually separated, their shared narrative dissolving into individual struggles. The consequences of their choices were their own to bear. My path had diverged so completely from theirs that they felt like characters in a book I had finished reading long ago. The scar of betrayal was now a faint, almost invisible line. It was a part of the complete record of my life, a reminder of the journey, but not the destination. I had faced the truth, however painful, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my narrative. My heart was whole, repaired and strengthened by time, resilience, and the quiet accumulation of authentic experiences. It beat with a steady rhythm, a testament to a life lived with integrity, even when faced with profound dishonesty. Sitting by the window, watching the snow fall softly on the harbour, I felt a deep sense of peace. I had built a life that was true, a life that resonated with the values I held dear. I was surrounded by authentic connections, engaged in meaningful work, and at peace with the history I had lived and the future that remained. I had vanished from a lie and appeared in a truth. This was my story, Elias Thorne, archivist of life, finding quiet contentment in the authentic narrative of his own enduring existence.